going to get away from the Ithaca restoration here for a little bit on the channel. Now I've done videos, I've done a couple videos on the Ruger 44 carbine over the last year or two. And this one is going to be a little bit different, a little bit unique. This is a Ruger 44 carbine, but this is the international. What I'm being asked to do by the client is to strip this and to refinish it. So we're going to do that, and of course there are issues with all these gun stocks that are that age, especially those that have been used by their owners, which is in my belief is always what I prefer to see. I've told you many times in my videos that as a restorer, what I love to see is the history. I love to see the story of these old firearms. It means they were loved. It means they were used. So this is kind of interesting to see this. So we're going to end up dismantling this. There's not much left to do. I've got to pull this block off. And I want to tell you a little something about, if you own one of these guns, I want to tell you a little something about this recoil block. Oftentimes you'll get a crack or a break in this area right behind the receiver. And one of the reasons for that is this block will come loose. There's a through bolt that goes up through the entire stock and then torques this recoil block or this set block back into the back of the stock. And as the seasons progress, as the gun is used, the wood will shrink and swell, and a bunch of other conditions will occur that'll actually let that torque bolt come loose. This is also a problem with the over and under shotguns. If you own one of Ruger's over and under shotguns, actually it's a problem with almost any brand of shotguns where the through bolt goes all the way up through the butt and then attaches the receiver to the stock by that through bolt. As the guns go through the seasons and the wood swells and shrinks, that block will come loose. And of course, as I was saying, even with the recoil, that constant shock will oftentimes tend to loosen up the through bolt. So if you own one of these old guns and you use it a lot, don't be afraid excuse me, to pull the butt pad off occasionally and get up into that through bolt and pull that, or rather retorque that set block. We're not going to use any strippers on this because I've already done a test strip here. What I've used is 100 grit sandpaper. Let me tell you a little something about Ruger's finish back in the day. Ruger used a 2-coat poly finish or polyurethane finish, and it was put in a spray booth. And we would bring these into the spray booth, and they would get mounted on a Lazy Susan, and the spray operator would spray this, turn it, spray it, okay, and they were putting like a 2 mil finish on. They let that mill finish, or that 2 mil finish, flash off or dry overnight. They'd come in the next day and we'd use a very fine sandpaper, and they would do something called scuff sand. And the scuff sand, essentially what it did is it roughed up that first coat of poly, and then they'd go back into the spray room again and they'd do another 2 mil finish, 2 or 3 mil finish. So at the end of the day, what you hoped for was 4 or 5 mils of finish. That's pretty thin. It's not thin to the point of being detrimental to the stock, but it's pretty thin because you're atomizing that finish as it comes out of the nozzle and then gets onto the stock. And of course, there's no chance for that finish to absorb itself into the pores of the wood. So literally, it nearly lays on top of the surface of the wood. Some of it does get down into the pores, but as a general rule, when you spray a finish on wood, it sort of lays on top. Well, because of that, it allows me to strip the finish just using sandpaper. It doesn't mean that I can do this in a sort of haphazard or casual way. I definitely have to be careful as I'm doing it, and I have to be observing, so that when I begin to do that sanding, that I'm being very careful that I'm sanding through the finish and then not sanding down into the wood. Eventually, I have to do some sanding in the wood because I need to start taking out some of the blemishes that have occurred over time. We are going to steam some of the dents out. We are going to do everything we can to bring this finish back to its glory, if you will. But again, I need to get this finish stripped before I can move on and do the next part of this, which ultimately is me reapplying a new coat of finish, and we won't get to that until a little bit later. So what I want to do is I want to pull this pad, and then I want to pull this block off. So let's go ahead and do that, and then we'll get started on the stripping. So for any of you who are old school gun enthusiasts, you know that some of our modern manufacturing, they're using star bolts, hex bolts, Phillips head screws, and these are old school. These are the way guns used to be made, and it's sort of traditional. This butt plate has straight slotted screws, which is the way guns should be made. You know, I mean, you know, God love modern manufacturing and the efficiencies you get from that, but you sort of lose the tradition of all of that art. If you believe what I believe, leave a comment in the comment section. I'm really interested in what you're thinking. We need to remove this butt plate, and again, it's a straight slotted screw. Not a major deal. This is Ruger's old plastic butt plates. They are fragile. They will snap or break, especially as they age. The plastic gets a little more brittle, and we need to make sure we're pulling these off in an even way, top and bottom. You don't want to bend them or put too much pressure on them. Ruger actually got away from using this material, not because it wasn't traditional in the sense that it's what you saw on a lot of Ruger gun stocks, but what was happening is a lot of the toes would break right in this area right here. So an owner would set this gun down, and he would set it down in a way that it would hit that toe, and that would snap the toe off. Not what you want to do to your rifle, whether it's brand new or one that you've had for a while. But again, the point in this is that I want you to, if you ever get into a situation where you're having to remove one of these plastic pads, with the pointy tip, you want to be very, very careful as you're doing it. So you can see that there is a hole, and that hole goes all the way up through, from here all the way up into the block. And my recollection is that was a regular 5-sided bolt. I haven't seen one in a long time. No, that one is just a straight slot. So I'm going to have to get a very long screwdriver and see if I can get that out. Move the right slightly. there's the bolt. And then that it's a fairly narrow bolt. There's not a lot of thickness to this, and then again it goes up through and then simply screws into the block, and then again it puts torque on there. There should be a washer in there, and there is. There we go. And one washer. All right, let's put that aside, and then we'll start talking about how we're going to strip this gun stock. All right. It's always critical when doing this kind of work, restoration work, refinishing work, that you think not in terms of efficiency or getting the work done in the shortest amount of time. You need to sort of slow your thinking down, and I've mentioned this many times. So we need to be as gentle in the process as we can, and we're always trying to do as little damage to the wood or to whatever you're working on as is possible. To that end, I have this small sanding block that I made. I've talked about this in a couple other videos. It's a small piece of walnut that I made, and what I did is I squared it up and I ran a flat surface on the mill and then glued this piece of rubber. I think the rubber came off an old inner tube or something like that. And then I beveled the edges. And the idea of beveling the edges is they're trying not to get any hard edges that could catch or create any harsh lines as you're doing this sanding. And the rubber gives a softness to the sanding, so that again you're not getting these flat spots. You're wanting always to not destroy the original radiuses that were built into the stock. You don't want to have facets or flat edges. I'm stripping this with 100 grit, and I'm using a cloth-backed paper. I'll tell you a little secret. When I retired from Ruger a couple years ago, I went over to the wood shop and I collected as many of these spent belts that I could. These are the belts that they ran on the powered sanding machines. They were long belts, and the guys would literally sand the stocks against these balloons that we just ran around a balloon, a sanding balloon that was inflated to a pressure that allowed the sandpaper to self-form around the radius. Again, the idea is you don't want to put facets in this. You want a nice soft blend. So I went over to the wood shop before I retired and I collected as many of these as they had. Did this for a while because I knew I was going to lose my contacts or my ability to get this stuff. Anyway, this is 100 grit paper, or cloth-backed rather, sandpaper. And I cut it so it's slightly larger than the block. And the thing I like about this smaller block is that it's a size that allows me to sand and grasp the block with authority, and I can control it as I go around the stock. Now, I'm only going to use this block on those broader surfaces, like the top here, this surface here, along the sides or the bottom. Once I get into these radiuses here, I'm going to have to use a different method, and I'll talk about that when we get to that part of it. So let's go ahead and we'll start stripping, and I'll sort of show you how this works. Now, at first glance, the 100 grit may seem a little aggressive, but actually it's not. Because remember, we're sanding down through the finish, and we're not sanding down into the wood. Once we get down through the finish, you'll begin to see the color will change, and you'll begin to see this blotchiness where the wood is exposed here, and we still got some of the finish that's exposed in this area here, and certainly in this area here. I'm not going to try and get all of that off with the 100 grit. I want to get close to the point where the original wood is just beginning to show through, and then I want to stop. Because I don't want those 100 grit scratches to get too deep into the wood, because if they do, then I got to work harder to get them out with the progressively finer sandpaper. All right, so I'm pretty happy with this on this side, coming up along that edge. I am certainly making no claim that my method's the only method. There's probably 100 of you out there that have stripped wood in your own ways, and it's all good. If it works for you. But over the years, I have found that, or as my boss in my training in lean manufacturing used to tell me, go slow to go fast. Going fast to go fast often leads to mistakes. So I am a strong adherent to that concept. One thing you want to kind of keep an eye on, sometimes the finishes will begin to clog the sandpaper. One nice thing about this poly finish is it's very hard, and it's a good durable finish. There's nothing, this is not me dissing on poly finishes. It's a good finish. But again, it sort of lays on the surface more than it absorbs into the wood. But one of the nice things about it is, because it lays on the surface, you've got a definite dimension between the top of that shiny surface down into the wood. And again, you're just pulling that off. I'm going to pull you guys off camera, and I'm going to sort of work through those flat surfaces first, and then I'll bring you back when we get into those radiuses where we have to use a slightly different technique. All right, I'll see you in a bit. Alright, so the flat surfaces are all sanded. Haven't done anything around these radiuses. We're going to pick that up in the next episode. It's going to be the same technique, but maybe slightly different. You have to use some different blocks in order to get around those areas. Some of them will be soft blocks, some of them will be just sticks. But anyway, so I'm going to get you back for the next episode. I wanted to get this out, get the basic technique shared with you. I've had a lot of requests in the comments for folks asking me to share my secret sauce finishes, and I'm going to do that when I get to putting the finish on this. So I wanted to give you guys a heads up. I am going to make an exclusive video for my patrons, and I'm going to explain on Patreon what my secret sauce is and how I mix it and how I apply it. My patrons have been really terrific. I mean, they've been sticking with me, they've been following me, and I haven't really had the opportunity to give them anything extra for their support. Most of them have said to me that they just want to support the channel, support the information I'm giving them. But in the case of the secret sauce, you're going to need to be a patron on my Patreon page to get that video. So heads up, that's coming. We're probably going to be a few videos in, but it's coming, and I'm going to share that with all of you. Thanks for watching, guys. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel, ring the bell so you get notified the next time I post a video. I'll see you in the next one.